Welcome to the serie What is Money, where we will explore the history of means of exchange, from the barter to cryptocurrencies. This exploration is dedicated entirely to the monetary system, starting with a journey into the history of money to understand the functioning of modern money. Money has had a long evolution, and its history shows that from its origin there has been an occult struggle for the control of property through the form of issuance. Today, we begin a long journey to descend into the details of this history and arrive at understanding over many episodes what is profoundly wrong, what are the recurring errors, of the current monetary and economic system. Today, the money is private. This structure forces individuals to work 3 times. In the ancient age of barter, a person needed to work only once, simply to produce the good intended for exchange. Today, we must first labor to produce goods, then work a second time to acquire the means of exchange, the private money issued by banks, and finally, we must work a third time to repay that private money. The central mystery we must solve is whether it has always been this way. Many facts and formations concerning the origins of the monetary system have been hidden for centuries and have finished by being lost, so that there are few certainties about money. The earliest forms of human exchange relied on 2 distinct methods, barter and credit. Early credit was vastly different from what we understand today. It relied on a high degree of trust, achievable only within the same community or a well-structured civilization. This system used simple accounting registrations of give and take regarding the exchanged goods. Initially, these records were oral and supervised by the elders of small communities, and later, with the development of writing in more complex societies, they were managed by special delegates. Crucially, this form of credit did not entail indebtedness for a means of exchange but only the payment for a commodity that had already been received. This type of credit required a strong trust, such as that realized within a small group or provided by a state. However, this reliance on internal trust was not always sufficient. This is why direct barter was used alongside credit registrations. Direct barter was favored particularly in commercial transactions where confidence could not be relied upon between different, unrelated collectivities, or with the development of commercial traffic. It was also preferred in the commerce of goods exchangeable immediately, where the merchandise was ready. Conversely, credit was utilized in those trades involving goods that had differing timescales, particularly seasonal products. Initially, the goods exchanged were those found in nature or directly produced by human labor, such as manufactured articles and agricultural resources. The inherent inconvenience of direct barter, however, soon necessitated a more practical approach, leading to the establishment of reference goods. Reference goods were selected based on practical criteria, their possibility of transport, their divisibility, and the intrinsic material nature of the good itself, in terms of its utility in the exchange. Among the most commonly used reference goods were livestock for exchanges of a certain importance, and seeds for the small exchanges, with a preference for seeds of grain, cereals, and all those plants vital for human nutrition. Subsequently, salt also entered and became part of these goods for transactions in exchanges. These goods used in the intermediation of the exchange gave rise to a unit of measure with which to calculate the value of the productions to be bartered. These goods had in themselves all the properties of transportability, both livestock and seeds, divisibility, in particular for the seeds, and useful material nature in the utilization of both reference goods. It was from the properties universally recognized that the convention was induced of these goods as a means of transaction. This transition marked the evolution from direct barter to a first form of archaic money. This money was not established by law, but by convention and universal recognition derived directly from the intense and anthropological use of these reference goods, which were livestock, seeds, and so on. The most important consideration that can be highlighted from this birth of a primordial form of money is that it did not derive from a debt but from the labor of humanity, which in this way created its own means to spend in exchanges. This system was widely utilized for thousands of years, entering also into what were the legal frameworks of the first civilizations united in city-states, such as yours in Mesopotamia. In these regulations, the loans of these goods were also foreseen in case of necessity, in which a form of interest was also included. However, this interest was very different from the current one, in which interests cannot be physically generated. A loan in livestock or a seed, once these goods were used for agriculture or breeding, would have generated new seeds and new livestock, creating in fact new money and interest to be able to repay the debt. Modern money, however, certainly cannot conceive of a new calf or a new seed. The same can be said of the metallic money of the past, as we will see later with the problems associated with this new situation. Meanwhile, these societies had already developed the first forms of loans and interest without having to resort to the use of gold or silver, which were later considered the only possible form of economy. This primordial monetary system of reference goods, despite being detached from the concept of money, managed to create the first complex economic civilizations in history and maintained itself until the birth of Christ and beyond. We recall, for example, that the soldiers of ancient Rome were paid in salt until the Augustan age, hence the current term salario, salary, and yet they managed to subdue the entire known world. Gold as payment for the armed forces was only introduced by the first emperor Augustus. In the ancient monetary system, the use of gold and other precious items was instead in relation to religious offerings in the temples, which over the centuries managed to accumulate large quantities of these metals without, however, putting them back into circulation for use in exchanges, because this gold remained inside the temples for the construction of jewelry or for offerings. The strict bond between gold and precious items with religion and the construction of holy objects suggests that this use, at least until the Iron Age around 1500 BC, remained predominantly religious. In ancient texts, we have the use of gold as offerings to temples or conquests derived from war, but at the same time, we have the use of livestock, salt, and plants in the payments of debts or in the purchase of goods. It is evident that the commercial system was already well developed and managed to function without the necessity of true money until the advent of true gold coinage. Offerings and payments were made to the temples both in precious metals and in goods of natural origin such as livestock and grain. but in civil society there are no traces of the use of metals for transactions at least until about 700 BC, even if we can anticipate this date by a few hundred years but not beyond the 12th century. In many texts, we have references to payments executed in grain and livestock, confirming the use of these goods as a form of money for transactions and, critically, as a unit of measure for the calculation of value. This point is of fundamental importance in the definition of money. Subsequently, with the advent of bronze and iron, utensils manufactured with these metals also became part of transactions. In the change of the monetary system from reference goods to precious metals, which occurred throughout the first millennium BC, a clear scenario can be delineated. The priestly class and the temples were the detentors of large quantities of gold, in contrast with its lack of availability for common people, who were the productive subjects of the era, mainly farmers and artisans. In the transition between a monetary system of exchange goods and a monetary system founded on precious metals, the principal detentors of gold were the religious classes, without having had to obtain this advantage through labor and production but solely for the privilege of representation in the name of the gods. It must be noted that in this process of the monetization of gold, the system of lending and interest did not undergo changes, thereby determining grave disequilibria in the monetary system. As we have seen, while a debt in livestock could easily be repaid over time with the birth of new livestock, or one in seeds with the subsequent harvest, the same could not happen with precious metals, which certainly could not conceive of a new living entity to act as a reference good. Therefore, at the moment of the official birth of metallic money, the gold was already concentrated in a few hands without these individuals having acquired the property from production or from a commercial exchange. There is no logical connection between the primordial system of reference goods, which was very effective and based exclusively on production, and the subsequent metallic money. The first Western coins, according to Plutarch, seem to have been coined in Greece with the effigy of a bull on one face, probably at Athens around 1250 BC, or in Lydia in 700 BC, according to the official monetary historiography more in vogue among economists. If this latter official date on the birth of money were accepted, it immediately reveals the problems regarding the property of the gold and its issuance. Barely 100 years after this potential 700 BC date, Solon had to introduce radical monetary reforms in Athens, as the system based on gold had soon led to the collapse from debt of a large part of the farmers and artisans, always for those reasons of concentration of power and ungenerability of interests. There were some monetary reforms to unhook the monetary system from gold, which was always the property of a small group of people and had been immediately a source of debt already in origin. Initially, as happened in the system of reference goods, the value of the gold in the coining of the money was conventional. The first Greek coins in fact had stamped the symbol of a bull on one of the two faces, and this was to indicate that the value of that piece of gold was corresponding to that of a bull, which was already a reference good for the primordial monetary system. Therefore, a conventional value already existing was assigned to the gold. It is to be believed that this may have marked the first induction of the value of money in history, that later developed by Aristotle only in the 20th century. A very important sign of this induction is precisely in the average weight of the coin of the first period, the talent or donna, which corresponded to about 8 grams. This weight was equivalent to the weight of 130 seeds of grain, which was exactly equivalent to the value of a cow in that monetary system of reference goods. This conversion between seeds and bestiame had been in use for millennia and therefore was taken as the reference for the passage to gold, confirming the induction and monetary convention later expressed by Oraitai. Money at its origin therefore would not have had the behavior or value of a commodity subject to demand and supply, as many economists claim, but that of induction and convention. There was no intrinsic value of the gold, as the value was subjective, induced, and conventional. The gold coin was then compared to the measures of the old system of reference goods, like livestock and seeds, and subsequently used due to its better characteristics of transport and divisibility compared to what was a cow. However, in the passage between a monetary system of reference goods and one in metal coined by the state or temple, it is evident that the system based on gold shifted the control of the amount of money from a generable good controllable by a single citizen, to one manageable only by a central power. With the reference goods, the farmer could establish individually the amount of the monetary mass, which was automatically regenerable. With the new system, this passed under the exclusive control of the detentors of precious metals, who in this way could decide the economic flows by increasing or contracting the monetary mass. Taking the 700 BC reference date, sources indicate that initially, up to about 600 BC, the coins were minted in the Orient exclusively in gold. Only subsequently was silver introduced, at least in the Occident. The Eastern system was then exported west. Here, first Greece, and subsequently Rome, were the protagonists of a historical struggle between the iniquitous debt money, scarce, decided upon by the gold holders, and treated as a commodity, and the abundant money regulated by law. This law-regulated money featured high circulation and was based on the model that recalled the preceding system of reference goods, that of livestock and seeds. Every Greek city and nearby Lydia, modern Turkey, had its own money, spendable only within the city territory. Meanwhile, the temples also functioned as banks, providing loans at interests, sometimes at 10% annually. They were not exclusively religious institutions, but also held a monetary and financial function, receiving a percentage on taxes and acting as the state mint for their reference city. Towards 18 BC, the 10 major temples of the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean basin, united into a single body. The functions of the mint and the monopoly of money were thus completely the preserve of the temples, who were the true possessors of the precious metal. The spendability of the money within the city borders was mandatory by law, but this was to prevent the flight of metal that would otherwise have gone to other cities and abroad. The introduction of silver was probably necessary to limit precisely the power of the possessors of gold, who were few, aristocratic, and religious. These gold holders had indebted the Greek cities so severely as to enslave numerous farmers for accumulated debts, almost cancelling that class of workers. The situation was so grave that it required special legislation by Solon. Despite the introduction of the new coining in silver, which was still manipulated by the oligarchy, Solon had to do more. He not only established a new coining in silver, not scarce like gold, but also a policy of controlling minimum prices for agricultural products. His famous reform included the abolition of slavery due to debt and the liberation of slaves, with the restitution of seized assets to the farmers who had evidently been defrauded by the iniquitous system. Solon also diminished the weight of the coins, increasing their mass in circulation, by taking gold obtained from Corinth and subsequently exploiting the discovery of new deposits. If, instead, we take as a reference the birth of money dated around 1200 BC, Plutarch describes in Parallel Lives the monetary reform of Lycurgus in Sparta, which took place in the 7th or 8th century BC. Lycurgus prohibited the use of gold and silver. In their place, he ordered the coining of iron discs. These discs were made fragile by being bathed in vinegar, so that they would have no intrinsic value and thus could not be used outside of the Spartan monetary system, thereby establishing a conventional value by law for these discs. The name of this money was pellanor, which was practically an iron disc of about half a kilo. The system is believed to have been in force for at least 5 centuries, which are then coincident with the maximum splendor of Sparta, before returning to the use of gold and silver, which then saw the decline of this city. Thus, once again with Sparta, it is highlighted that the money was only a convention to be established by law, with its value decided by circulation and acceptance. The pellanor was a form of nomisma. This word, today referred to in numismatics generally as collecting, in reality once defined the economic and historical study of money. This is a derivation of the Latin nomisma, which is derived from the Greek nomos, indicating the law or the administration of the city. It was indicated in Latin to specify the money defined by Aristotle. Aristotle specified the term nomisma in the 5th book of the Nicomachean Ethics as the definition of the value of money, in that it is the measure of riqueza and not riqueza itself. Aristotle used words that highlight how this term with which money was indicated had its origin in law. He said that it is for this reason that the things that are exchanged must be in some way commensurable. For this purpose, money was introduced, which in a certain way acts as a middle term. It measures everything, consequently also the excess or deficiency of value, so also how many shoes are equivalent to a house or to a determined quantity of provisions. He noted that all products must find their measure in a single thing. This, in reality, is need, which unifies everything. If men did not have need of anything or did not have the same needs, the exchange would either not exist or would not be the same. Aristotle specified that money was born by convention as a medium of exchange to satisfy need. This is why it has the name of nomisma, money in modern language, because it does not exist by nature, but exists per nomos, by law. Furthermore, its value depends on us, and we have the power to change its value or render it without value. Therefore, all commodities must be valued in money. This makes exchange always possible, and if exchange is possible, the community is also possible. Money, as a measure, equalizes the commodities because it renders them commensurable with each other. In truth, it would be impossible to render such different things entirely commensurable, but this is possible in a sufficient measure in relation to need. Consequently, there must be a unit, but this exists by convention, which is why it is called nomisma. It is this unit that renders all things commensurable, with everything in fact measured in money. Aristotle noted that exchange was possible even before the existence of money. There is no difference between giving 5 beds for a house or the value of 5 beds in money for a house. Therefore, for Aristotle, and then taken up in the 20th century by Aristotle, the money is a measure and a conversion regulated by law, and not certainly a commodity. The definition of nomisma as dictated by Aristotle would prove decisive for the Roman delegation. Rome sent representatives to Sparta to study the monetary system set up by Lycurgus. This study influenced not only the Latin term nomisma, which then derived the term moneta, but above all, it helped structure the monetary system in Rome. This structure would lead the city to dominate the entire known world and establish a commerce so flourishing and complex that it would only be equaled many centuries later. The Roman system will be the subject of a future exploration. The enduring struggle throughout history pits the iniquitous, scarce, debt-ridden, commodity money determined by private gold holders against the abundant, law-regulated, conventional money based on the needs of the community and the principle of measure. Understanding the difference between these two systems, one rooted in production and convention, and the other rooted in scarcity and concentrated power, is necessary to grasp what is profoundly wrong with the current monetary and economic structure, where money is once again private, forcing us to labor 3 times instead of 1. Money is fundamentally a measure established by law, not an inherently valuable commodity. Greeting, we will wait for you with a new episode of What is Money? Thank you for your presence. Please like and subscribe for more stories like this.